Are you attracted to extreme perspective views, dramatic angles such as this one here, looking up at a corner tower and the main dome of St. Augustine in Paris? It's not hard to see why such scenes are so attractive to artists, with the great visual tension and drama of what we see. But for all their attractiveness to draw, they're often quite difficult. And perhaps we never even attempt at all. It just looks too overwhelming. Let me share with you my trick and my tips for drawing extreme perspective views. And it's the one subject type where I break my normal rule, where I find that it doesn't work particularly well, and to use a different way of looking, a different way of thinking works a lot better. Well, in a nutshell, when I think about drawing extreme perspective views, when I have one in front of me, I think about two main things. I focus on two main things: angles and shapes. Angles and shapes. Now, normally, I have an emphasis on looking at form, understanding the three dimensions of a scene, of an object, the way things curve around or build on each other. I try to reduce larger, bulkier shapes down, or more complex shapes, down to simpler shapes, and then to disassemble parts of structures, if you like. And that normally works very well to help choose the best marks to use. However, a scene such as this, I find that can be a very misleading way of thinking. Because if, for instance, when I'm drawing the dome, I'm thinking of the form of the dome, I'm thinking of the size and the expanse and the curvature of it, that's going to lead me astray in this case, because it's going to encourage me to think of a larger, fuller form than what I actually see here. It's going to make me think of this dome in another position, from a less extreme perspective position. What I need to do instead is to think shapes, to not think of it as having any three dimensions at all, but almost as a cut-out sheet of paper stuck down with a shape, with an outline. And what I need to do is to replicate that outline. But I need to do it making sure I follow the angles that I have in my drawing. Now, we should always focus on angles, any angles, whether they're perspective angles or any other angle, because if we don't get those right, it's usually fairly obvious in some way. But with extreme perspective, the angles are often more extreme, which does mean it can be difficult to really push the lines up to the highest angle that we need to replicate on our paper. So with this scene, you'll notice where I started with this lower section of the side tower. Where I start simply depends on what part of the drawing I think will give me the best foundation for what I have to draw ahead. Now, all things being equal, that's usually somewhere in the center, because then as I move out, if little mistakes creep in, they won't be bit by bit, they won't grow as large. If I start down in this corner and little mistakes creep in, they're all going outwards in the one direction. So the mistake, and particularly a scale mistake, can end up being more significant. But in this case, I still think I'm going to have the best chance to create the best foundation, draw the most accurate starting point with the lowest part of this tower. And having done that, you notice that I've blocked out the angle of the wall that's right in front of us, because that's an important place to mark so that I don't bring lines down past there, and I also know where to take lines up to. So I spent a fair bit of time checking that. You'll notice I measured it with my pen several times. And now I'm going up with these pilasters on the second level of the tower, always checking and even just slightly adjusting angles. Now that little half column thing with the cap on the top to the right of the clock there, looking at it here, I don't feel it quite angles enough to the left. It's a little too much straight up when it should have a lean to the left. And this is the thing I talk about. But when I put the pilaster that sits behind it in place, it does give me a chance to tilt it a little bit more. And so that between the two, we end up getting, I think, to the angle that we want. But particularly when we have a framework such as this, and I think of the corners of this tower as being like a scaffolding to construct the tower. If you notice, I went up with the pilasters. Once I worked out the widths, I went up, keeping the angle the same, but still checking the angle as I go. And then I do the infill. And I just do it bit by bit by bit. Now, this drawing took me 40 minutes to draw in real time, just under 40 minutes. I'm using a 0.2 millimeter Copic multi-liner pen. And so you're watching this at 3 times the speed it took me to draw. It's a fairly loose style. Most freehand drawings are, I suppose. And again, checking the angles. The angles are not necessarily what we think, but we still have the fan shape pattern happening. So all of the angles down, if you like, one side of these towers, whether it's the base of the tower and the upper section of the tower, all the horizontal lines follow that fan pattern that we expect in perspective. And then when we turn the corner of the tower, then that set of horizontal lines all follow the fan pattern. So eye level is down below, actually out of the picture range. It's been cropped out of the picture by the angle I was holding the camera. So that means all of these angles just keep increasing in angle as they move higher. So we need to reflect that too, not to start making them parallel, but to keep them slightly higher than the one behind, the one below. Now all these cornices end up being a bit of a tangle. So again, I'm trying to draw the effect of these, not exactness. I'm not trying to draw the cornice lines and then do the bits that come out above the corners and then join that up with the next bit. I'm drawing the effect. I'm trying to capture the feel of that with the angles and the protruding parts and have that looking accurate. Now for the tower, the top of this tower, really important to look for shapes and not to be thinking it's some sort of hemisphere. Because if I don't get it quite right, it's going to look like it's coming forward a bit too much, which is a little bit what mine is doing. That little round window vent in the top is really probably about 2 millimeters at least too high, which doesn't sound much, but it's not a very large distance, so I think it's a noticeable difference. It should just be slightly lower. We're really just looking at more of an angle up on this. It seemed low enough when I first drew it. But we get a second chance to practice this with the dome, with the main dome. Now, I'm positioning this against the tower that I've already drawn, using the reference as a place for that. I didn't get those angles in that left-hand section of the dome as steep as I should have. This is where we often start to get drawing fatigue, and we've done a major part, we're reasonably happy with it, we think we're on the home run, and we just stop paying quite the same attentions to the perspective angles. We feel that we can intuitively put them in, and we often end up intuitively not being terribly correct. And so again, I'm not thinking of a dome, I'm just looking at the shape, also aligning with the tower, because I do want this dome to be in scale with the tower. The dome, of course, is much larger, although it doesn't actually sit higher here because of the angle and the fact that the tower is closer to us. But I'm looking at those shapes of those blue sections of the tower and of the dome, and I'm wanting to draw the shapes, create those shapes by the lines and the angles and the spacings that I do. The thing I'm trying not to think about in this case is it's a dome. I want to think of it as flat little shapes that have been cut out and stuck down, and I want to outline those shapes. Now, once I've got the shapes mapped out, of course, then I need to think form again so I can make my line work and my marks appropriate and to create the effect of the dome moving backwards. So you'll notice that I've drawn it with a lighter touch than the tower because I want the tower to feel closer than the dome. And then lastly now, I just do these very dark details here with this wall closest to us. Since I was in Paris and took this photo in 2015, I think it was, or it might have even been 2006, my first trip, the church has been thoroughly cleaned, but it was still showing some of the grime, of the passing years at this stage. So I'm not wanting to be too heavy with my line work for this section because I really did want it to be a focus on the tower and the dome. But I decided not just to leave it as a diagonal line, but to put something here. It is all fairly flat relief compared to the towers and the dome on this wall here. And still needing though to be checking angles and looking at shapes. And I take that line up right to the top when it should have actually been spaced down. I did that on the lower side tower as well. I will have to learn to, I don't know, it just seems to be a blind spot when I do arches at an angle. And then a rough job on the smaller one, that's significantly smaller, because with the steeper perspective angles, foreshortening happens faster and faster. And then just a few leaves on the top to add a little interest, to give a bit of contrast, a bit of nature, to bring a part of up there closer to us, so that therefore the tower actually feels further back. So I think that increases the visual drama, the depth of plane on this scene. And that's it. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. What do you think? Have you ever tried to draw an extreme perspective? How did it go? Well, you'll find this photo on my channel community page if you want to have a go at this. So why not? So remember, think shapes and angles. Focus on shapes and angles. But of course, whatever you focus on, whatever you're drawing, however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.